out, but you're welcome to send him a message, and I suspect either late tonight or sometime tomorrow he'll get around to responding. Craig Gottwals is our guest. Craig, let's talk healthcare. Benefit-revolution.com is his website. What do you make of the bills that came out today?
Well, Michael, I think it's more taxes, more government, with a couple of get-out-of-jail-free cards built into it. I don't think this improves anything on the whole of any significance in any way.
Well, look, I'm as cranky as you are. You know that. But for people that are not going to dig into this, it does remove the individual mandate.
Yeah. No.
It does remove the employer mandate.
Yep.
The two most important aspects of what's wrong with Obamacare, those at least we do away with. Then we start getting into areas, those are the low-hanging fruit, right?
Right. And we've talked about that on your show before. Those are important. Those are very important for the economy, and there's no doubt about it. But this law, it had 22 taxes baked into it. The first two iterations of repeal took out 21 of those 22 taxes, and now this one only takes out 18 of those 22 new taxes. So they actually baked back in more taxes and more government give-out dollars for big insurance companies in this bill, and they did that in part to buy some of the goodies they gave away. You know, they're giving away another $45 billion for opioid addiction issues. They're giving away another $70 billion to basically prop up and Band-Aid the loss ratios in the exchanges. So now they're giving away just under $200 billion to insurance companies, and that's why you see a senator like Rand Paul say, "I'm out. This is ridiculous." I mean, I do appreciate what Ted Cruz got added into the bill, but overall, I don't think it's enough to really change our assessment of how this bill looked 3 weeks ago. It added in a few goodies, but for people that like freedom and small government, it took away just as many goodies, in my opinion.
Let's talk about Ted Cruz's bill or amendment.
Yeah, his amendment. Yeah.
Explain that if you would.
Well, he brilliantly lobbied for the addition of the ability to go ahead and buy what we call narrow or skinny plans. And you can tell the objectivity of the reporting on this. If they call it skimpy plans, they're like 95% of the media, and they're approaching the analysis of this bill from the left. And if they call it a narrow network, they're being about as fair and objective as you can, because that's really what it is it's saying, look, we're not going to force you to buy these ridiculously bloated, overinflated Obamacare mandated benefit plans. For example, we're not going to require teetotalers to buy substance abuse addiction policy provisions. We're not going to require 80-year-olds to buy maternity and lactation care. And so Ted Cruz got that added in, and the trade-off for that was any insurance company that wants to offer a plan like that can do so as long as they also offer a fully robust Obamacare-style plan in an exchange as well. And I think that was brilliant on Ted Cruz's part. The insurance industry on a whole doesn't really like it because they know that what that does is it'll cause your healthier people to move to the cheaper plans. It'll cause your sicker people to gravitate towards the more expensive plans, and that augments a phenomenon in the industry we call adverse selection, which leads to a death spiral, which is why they also had to bake in an extra $70 billion to essentially help bail out insurance companies once they lose money on that provision in the long run.
Which they will.
They will. They absolutely will. But this law just dumps more money into the marriage of big government and big insurance to sort of limp us along another few more years in what I would call partially socialized healthcare, which is, I think, what we have in America now. We don't have a free market anymore, and we're not moving towards a free market, although, good on Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. They're fighting the good fight. They just have a little different approach to it here. I think last I heard, Ted Cruz is going to support this because they did put his amendment in. But I guarantee you, if you were to have an honest conversation with Ted Cruz, he would tell you a whole bunch of things he does not like about this bill. Of course.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. But if you're scoring Ted Cruz's performance through this, he made his priority. He picked rather than just being against the whole thing, he picked an issue, that being lowering premiums. He figured out a way that he could peck around the edges and lower some premiums for some people, and now you can claim a legitimate win in lowering premiums, which is what he promised he would do. Not necessarily the most conservative position, but a very popular position, and I think a winner for a guy who's up for re-election next year.
You know, I can't disagree with that, Michael. It's funny because if you'll recall, I mean, I know your listeners are pretty avid and they listen, regularly. When you and I first talked about this, we started with the House bill back a couple of months ago. And I was a little bit bullish on that House bill because I thought it did some really good things. And one of them was repealing every single one of the taxes, but for one. And the other thing that the House bill did was it gave tax credits to people based upon age, not based upon income, which
right.
I philosophically like for economic reasons. Now they've peeled away from both of those standards to get to this place, and overall, if we didn't have Ted Cruz's amendment in this bill, I would really dislike it. But no, on the whole, for people who want to at least move the ball closer to liberty, closer to personal freedom, this is better than Obamacare because, like you said, it eliminates 18 of the 22 taxes, and it eliminates both of those mandates, which are really hard on the economy. I mean, one of the studies I linked in my article that I know you may or may not have time to have read yet is that Chicago economist just did a very detailed study on Obamacare, and he projects that Obamacare's mandates have cost a minimum of 250,000 jobs in the U.S. economy. Just those two mandates.
Wow.
That's significant, man.
Of course it is. Yeah. And let's go back to basics in the next segment. Can you hold with me for a moment, Craig?
Absolutely.
Craig Gottwals is our guest. His website is benefit-revolution.com. He helps companies deal with compliance with these sorts of issues. It's how he spends his time geeking out on health insurance and compliance and benefits and these sorts of things. We'll talk about Ted Cruz's amendment a little more and what came out today. A little bit in the weeds, but important stuff. We need to focus on it.
The Michael Berry Show.
Seems like it's raining harder today. The rain must have known I was coming this way. It ain't easy living on the run.
Craig Gottwals is our guest, benefit-revolution.com. Craig, the reality is it doesn't matter what's in the bill. It matters how it's going to be explained to the mass of humanity and what people are going to think is in the bill. When you look at the promises that Republicans made on the campaign trail, most of them promised to repeal Obamacare. This doesn't repeal Obamacare. Some of them said repeal and replace. This does replace, but when you look at the things that you think drive Americans and that cause their opposition to Obamacare, what are the major issues with Obamacare that you feel this doesn't address?
It does not address 18 still existing taxes that were layered in under Obamacare that will not be repealed under this bill.
But most Americans don't know that.
Excuse me, 4. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. It repealed
18 out of 22.
4. Yeah. I'm sorry. It leaves 4 of them. And it embeds a just under $200 billion insurance-government relationship whereby our taxpayers go from the federal government, our taxpayer dollars go from the federal government to large insurance companies that lose money on these plans because of the way these plans are structured. So it keeps sort of an AIG bailout mentality, if you will, and it keeps some of these taxes that I find reprehensible to economic growth in our country.
Well, yes, and we're talking about the making of good policy, and I agree with you. We should be engaged in the making of good policy. But if I'm Karl Rove or Manafort or Reince Priebus, and I say, look, Mr. President, this bill's not perfect. It's not anywhere near it, but we can call this a win. We're going to see some economic stimulus as a result. The market is going to correct. We're going to see some growth. Our biggest challenge is going to be inflation because of the growth that's going to happen. We're going to watch more people expand and hire more people. We're going to see personal wealth increase. You're going to ride this into the next presidential election, isn't he right?
Yeah, I think there's a legitimate place you can make that claim because it does repeal 18 of the 22 taxes, and it gets rid of those two mandates. And those are significant. And you know what we shouldn't sell short is it does curtail the growth of Medicaid into our future so long as they stick to what's on the paper. And I think they won't, but that's a whole different issue years down the road. But that's a big deal. I mean, Michael, just as a simple fact, Medicaid is a huge part of Obamacare's expansion of health care and government spending. In 1966, when Medicaid was passed, it was 2% of our federal budget. Today, it's 20% of our federal budget. When it was passed, it was designed to cover kids and the very, very poor and people who could not physically. Now it covers able adults, and it's gone from 2% of our federal budget to 20%. I think one of the other most significant things this bill does is it elevates.
Craig, are you moving around? Are you in a bad spot? You're cutting in and out on us.
Sorry, Mike. I am. I told Justin I'm on the road between meetings for this one.
No worries. We had that once before, I remember. Hopefully, it'll hold on now.
I'm on a major interstate. So
tell me, you're king for a day, and this bill passes, and you have the opportunity with the stroke of one pen to change one thing about it. What is the one thing you change?
Oh, man, that's a really good question, Michael. That's a really good question. One thing about this bill, so I don't get to – okay, so I would –
I'm going to give you a moment to ponder that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to suggest I couldn't understand how Donald Trump could get elected in a Republican primary, but I've come to understand that politics is the art of the possible, and people – not everybody is as policy-driven. You're very close to this issue. And I care deeply about it. I'm not as steeped in it as you are. I care about the opportunity to nail the perfect public policy. But the reality is most Republican voters don't care about that. And I think that what's going to happen here, the repeal of the individual mandate and the employer mandate, those two things alone, whether there's a bunch of pork in here, there is, or not, those two things alone are going to change people's lives dramatically immediately. And I think that's going to be considered a win.
Yeah. You know that one thing I would change, Michael, and it's whether it's one thing depending upon how you define it. So I'm an attorney, so I'm going to define it my way. Get rid of all 22 taxes. Keep the promise that we're going to repeal every new tax Obamacare layered in.
Yeah.
And the reason, as a fiscal conservative, I can justify that is because the four taxes they're keeping in there, they're not super significant, and we could pay for those other ways with other tweaks in the federal budget pretty easily. But you could at least then keep the promise of every single tax layered in under Obamacare is now dead. And if you did that with both mandates, it'd be pretty hard not to get excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, I got to think, it puts the media in a very difficult position to oppose this when the poll comes out last week, and I think it's accurate. 89% of Americans want it fixed, if not altogether replaced. It was a pretty even split on how the 89 breaks down, fix it or just trash it. And you would seemingly accommodate, 50, 60, 70% of Americans by doing that. And so while it might frustrate me that we're missing an opportunity to achieve greatness, we are going to get something that is admittedly good. And Republicans can consider that a win. They got primaries coming up in next spring.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, if you were to ask me, do I think this is going to pass? I'd say it's pretty close to 50-50, but if I had to go one way or the other, I don't think this is going to pass. And it's because I think arguably this is a more liberal bill than the House bill. So even if it were to pass the Senate, you got to run this back through the House, and that Freedom Caucus is not going to like the enhanced bailout fund and
God
the
bless 'em.
additional taxes. Yeah,
God
they're
bless
not
'em.
going to like it. And so I think this has a less than 50% chance of passage.
Yeah, we shall see. I think that when they close rank, Trump needs a win, and he hasn't been able to engage on a policy issue, and I don't think he'll ever build the wall. But I do think that he sees a great opportunity for a policy that he can put his name on that is a win with the base, and I think that that's going to make the difference. We'll see.
Yeah, the overarching theme here is that true conservatives and or libertarians at heart, people that back in 2009 and 2010 did not believe federal health care tax dollars should be going to able-bodied people to buy insurance plans, those people have lost the battle because there's probably only 2 senators on our side anymore in that camp.
I haven't reviewed this aspect yet, but a caller asked the question. It's not a massive amount of money, but it does matter to a lot of people in a big way. Does it fund or defund Planned Parenthood?
I believe this defunds Planned Parenthood. I actually read it this morning, believe it or not. Now, it's 172 pages, and people say, "Well, how the heck can you read that?" Well, here's the deal. If you hit my website, I wrote an article about it. On the very top of that article, I link you to side-by-side comparison of the laws. When you look at them, there's only 30 pages that are different between the laws, and it's color-coded when you look at it.
This is the red line
version. Yeah, exactly. So there's really not a whole lot of pages of difference between this bill and the last bill. The last bill defunded Planned Parenthood, and I believe this one does the same. I don't think that changed.
Okay. Fair enough. Craig Gottwals, always a pleasure to talk to you. Benefit-revolution.com. Good resource if you want to learn more about health insurance and health care policy, finance, and everything that goes into that. We seek his guidance often.